All right, howdy folks, and welcome to a Jimbo Fisher Texas A&M retrospective. Now, I'm a little late to this whole issue. Um, Obviously, the news has been out. Texas A&M fires Jimbo Fisher. What I'm going to try to do in this retrospective is just kind of see if we can't find an alternative angle, a different perspective on the whole thing, besides just, it was time for Jimbo Fisher to go. And I can certainly entertain that idea as well. But for the purposes of this, we're just going to try to see if we can't come up with some other conclusion. As you can see, I have the Texas A&M school history here pulled up to the year 2002. Obviously, we're only interested in these past couple years. So in 2017, A&M fires Kevin Sumlin. In 2018, they get Jimbo Fisher. So the first year they go 9-4. Year number 2, 8-5. Year number 3, they go 9-1, and that's a very interesting season that we'll circle back to. 2021, they go 8-4, really bad. 2022 season 5-7, and what he was able to coach in 2023, they go 6-4. This 7-4 record is including their pass game, which he did not coach. So overall, I mean, it definitely could have been a lot worse. But I've written down a few things that I'd like to kind of explore and see if we can't find a different angle on. So the first thing to point out is that in 2018, Jimbo Fisher was really on track to finish about the same as Kevin Sumlin, another 8-win year. And Jimbo Fisher's first year, that's not too bad. But if we go to 2018, we go down to the schedule. They had a historic game, last game of the regular season versus LSU, which they won 74-72. Now, this is something that I want to point out, is that while Kevin Sumlin did have a couple more wins overall, compared to Jimbo Fisher, Sumlin was never able to beat LSU. And so when comparing Kevin Sumlin with Jimbo Fisher, this is something that I think is really interesting. So Jimbo Fisher has 3 wins against LSU and 1 win versus Alabama. Kevin Sumlin has 0 wins versus LSU and 1 win versus Alabama. So just those 2 teams alone, I think that Jimbo Fisher is definitely an upgrade retrospectively in hindsight to Kevin Sumlin. So Kevin Sumlin, his teams were they were really fast, but they weren't able to really play a team down to the last play. Oftentimes, the teams were out by halftime. I mean, against Alabama and LSU and a few other teams like Kansas State, for example. I mean, really in the third and fourth quarter, the game was really over, and we were just hoping that they would catch up. So, I think that is definitely something that Jimbo Fisher brought to the table that Kevin Sumlin was, for whatever reason, not able to bring in, was that toughness, that perseverance, especially against stronger teams. Something else about Kevin Sumlin is that Kevin Sumlin, he was able to have a once-in-a-lifetime quarterback, and I don't think Jimbo Fisher was really able to find, a solid QB that could last. Ever since 2020 was the last year that A&M had a stable quarterback, and that was Kellen Mond. So for whatever reason, I think that is something that led to a lot of issues. So they go 9-4 2018. 2019, they go to a very familiar 8-5 right here. Kevin Sumlin had, what, 3 of those? So A&M was very familiar with that. And then 2020 shows up. And 2020 is an interesting year because, they had the whole pandemic issue. What's interesting is that people will kind of put an asterisk next to this season. And I don't think that's totally fair. And we'll get into that. So 2020 shows up, we all know what happened in 2020, and people were kind of uncertain would A&M, or sorry, would there be college football played? And at least in the SEC, they said yes, there would be. I think people discount this season because of like the different rules, like the attendance restrictions or something. But it's still the same game of football, the same rules, the same hits. There's no reason to believe that only A&M got worse compared to everyone else. A&M played relatively, at the same. They played with the same conditions as every other team in the SEC, and they finished 9-1. So I don't think you can take that away from Jimbo. You'll sometimes see memes that say, Jimbo Fisher was never able to achieve a double-digit win season. And numerically, that is true. But if you notice, in 2020, how many games were there? I think there were 8. There were 9. So there's 9 SEC games in 2020. And A&M loses once to Alabama pretty handily, 24-52. But everywhere else, they take a win. Now, if you notice, there's no non-conference games in this schedule. So if A&M plays New Mexico or, ULM or one of those teams that is typically on the schedule every year, a 9-1 in the SEC A&M team, it's hard to not see them beating those non-conference opponents, those group of 5 non-conference opponents. So really, 2020 should have been the double-digit win season. So this is something that Kevin Sumlin didn't have to deal with. He didn't have to deal with, I think it's -3 games on a schedule. So 2020, I think, while obviously A&M's record is clearly 9-1 right here, they played an abbreviated schedule. And, if they had those typical kind of G5 weaker teams, there's no reason to doubt that they would get the win. So, this really, I kind of see it as a double-digit win season, but there just weren't enough games. So I think that's something that people kind of overlook, that nobody really talks about. So 2020 really should have been a double-digit win season, but there just weren't enough games. Moving on to the next season, they go 8-4. So a bit of a disappointment after that year. And we can always speculate, if the pandemic didn't happen, would they have still gotten, 1 loss in conference play? I don't know. One more thing to mention about 2020 is the college football playoff did leave A&M at the door. I will give credit to the people that say that it's hard to really count this season. I will give them credit with respect to the playoff because the teams weren't playing the same number of games. Like some teams were playing 6 games, some teams were playing, 10 or so, like A&M, or 9. So the schedules were wildly different. So I think that's kind of hard to measure across all the teams. But they did finish 4th, which is, still pretty good. So 2021 happens. This is the year that this is the first year where A&M loses its starting quarterback. I believe their starting quarterback goes down in the Colorado game. And so they have to roll with backup, I think it was Zach Calzada at the time. And lose to Arkansas, Mississippi State. But they do end up beating Alabama, which is a huge deal. Unfortunately, still finished with 8 wins. The issue with this season, though, was that they were bowl eligible, so they finished 8-4, but A&M doesn't accept a bowl invitation. Now, this is something that I was really disappointed in Jimbo for. Now, I don't run the team, so I don't know what the state of the team was, what it really looked like from the inside. It's really easy to sit here and say that you should have just played the game. I think they should have gone, but again, I don't know what it was that really made Jimbo decide that they shouldn't play. So 2021 is another opportunity to have a 9-win season, which I think 9 wins is really where your floor should be if you're Jimbo Fisher. So for the sake of his reputation, for the sake of the image of the program, I think they should go and really play into the whole 12th man motto and the whole trademark and everything. That would have been something really interesting to see. But supposedly they were down to like their 3rd or 4th string quarterback. I don't know what the deal was. But the point is that they go 8-4 and miss the opportunity to go 9-4, which I think would have looked a lot better on the record. To go 9-4 in 2018, drop down to 8-5 in 2019, go 9-1 in 2020, and unfortunately there weren't enough non-conference games to bump that up to a double-digit win season. And then 2021 shows around and you go 9-4 again. I think that's a good floor, that 9-win season. 2022, I think, is the year that Jimbo probably lost a lot of supporters. Because you go 5-7. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the 5th year into his tenure at Texas A&M, and they go 5-7. This is there were probably a lot of injuries that year. Again, with the injured quarterback, I think they were playing with QB2. I think it was. And I mean, what can you say about a 5-7 season? I mean, the games were close. There were a lot. This year was very close to being, something like 11-1. This Appalachian State loss was pretty embarrassing. But that's a 3-point loss. This was a hand. This was definitely a handy uh, loss by Mississippi State, so that wasn't really close. But you lose a close one against Alabama by 4 points. South Carolina by 6. Ole Miss by 3. Florida, you do lose pretty handily, 24-41. Auburn by 3. You know, so let's say that A&M scores one more touchdown in all of their games. They go from 5 to 6. That would have been tied, so there's no telling. Or sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. So they go 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 8, 9, 10. So maybe another double-digit win season. So I mean, going 5 and 7 is pretty bad, and there's really nothing to salvage. There's no moral victories. You know, you can't really say anything for a 5 and 7 season. You know, is this just the symptoms of having a bunch of really good players, but just not being coached well? That's certainly a possibility. Is it because they had a lot of injuries? That obviously plays a factor. But I think the QB injury thing is probably pretty big, because I mean, your QB makes such a big difference, especially when you have someone who's solid. So A&M constantly having to deal with that QB2, QB3 situation is something that really, I think, is a part of Jimbo's A&M legacy. Now, is it because of his offensive line coaching staff? I don't know, but you look at all the best coaches, especially the ones that are paid as much as he was. Do they ever drop this low, even with injuries? You know, were A&M's injuries unique this season as far as more than pretty much every other team? I don't know. I haven't counted. But 5 and 7, not acceptable, right? If an elite coach and if an elite team is going to have a floor, you'd want it to be like 7, 8, 9, not 5, you know, because you're not even getting bowl eligible with this. So this was a really bad year. A lot of close games, but ultimately didn't win them. 2023 rolls around, and some people thought this was Jimbo's make it or break it year. So he goes and gives up play calling, or at least he hires a new offensive coordinator. His previous offensive coordinator was Daryl Dickey. I think he was from Memphis. I don't know exactly what the structure was and how they set it up, but obviously Jimbo was still calling plays, because you could see him on the sideline with all the notes and everything and calling the plays. And then 2023 rolls around, he hires Bobby Petrino, and I guess he gives up play calling duties, but probably still has a lot of structure for Petrino to follow. So how much of that factors in, I don't know. But if you go down to the schedule, this Miami game, we'll start off with New Mexico. New Mexico looked pretty good. You know, that's about where you want to. That's about where you want to beat one of these New Mexico type teams. So things are looking like maybe they were on the up. Miami rolls around and they just get beat deep consistently. So they lose 33-48. And then people were really looking forward to this Alabama game because they were going to see, this might be Jimbo's last year. Is he going to be able to push past that 8-9 win ceiling? Once again, he does play them close. 2026 loses that one. Tennessee 13-20. I think that if anyone kind of gave him a pass on Alabama and Tennessee, they really, Jimbo really lost support after Ole Miss. Because out of all these ranked opponents, Ole Miss was probably the easier one to beat. Arguably maybe it was Tennessee in hindsight now. So this is the game where they miss out on the opportunity to go at least 10 wins, which if you're not going to at least compete for the conference, which was lost in Alabama and Tennessee, at least go 10 wins and get to a decent bowl game. And that was lost in the Ole Miss game right there. So they play Mississippi State, and then Jimbo Fisher is fired in between these two games. When exactly was the decision finalized to dismiss Jimbo Fisher? Some people say maybe it was after Ole Miss, maybe it was before. I don't know. So he finishes this season 6-4. He did still have an opportunity to beat LSU, which would have been good, and he could have finished on 9 wins, which, if you're gonna be on the floor, you want that floor to be at least no less than 9 wins, which, again, had they gone to the bowl game in 2021, would have, been more of a consistent floor for Jimbo. So Jimbo Fisher's fired, and now, who knows what the future holds. If I had to make the decision on whether or not to keep Jimbo, I personally would have taken the long road with Jimbo. And the reason for that is because the coaching talent is scarce. People think that 8 wins is the floor. It's not. 8 wins is not the floor. It seems to me that even a coach like Jimbo, who can win 8-9 games in the SEC, is still rare. So I do kind of look at it like that. I do ultimately think that Jimbo's undoing was the amount of money that he was being paid. Because even if, like, the QB injuries, even if that was a justified defense, even if the abbreviated season in 2020 as being the would-be double-digit win season, even if that was a legitimate defense, even if the plethora of injuries in 22 were a legitimate defense, even if the really close games, the consistent close games against top opponents, even if that was a defense, none of that matters because of the $77 million. None of it matters because, A&M is spending Jimbo into a corner. So nothing can really be said when you're spending that much money. Now, is that Jimbo's fault that A&M agreed to $77 million? How much did A&M fight back on the contract, or did they just say, here's a blank check, here you go? I don't know. I think a lot of it is A&M's fault because of the amount of money that came from A&M to pay to Jimbo Fisher. Was Jimbo Fisher really looking to leave A&M in 2020 or 2021? That's about where his contract was at the time. I don't know. Was he really going to go to LSU? I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to tell how much of that was just, playing agents and schools against each other to get a better deal. I don't know. But the point is that he got paid $77 million, and ultimately the results weren't there in the time that he had. But I would have taken Jimbo in the long road. And I would have done it because of how close his games were. If we compare him to Sumlin, which I've done before a lot, his teams were like sports cars. They were really fast, but they were frail. They couldn't take a punch to the gut. They couldn't go to the last down and beat a team at the very end. And that's the kind of team that A&M needed. So Jimbo Fisher, if he did anything, he instilled that toughness, that perseverance to be able to, if nothing else, hang with the best teams in the nation, which is still a feat. It's not your goal, but you want to be able to at least do that. So I would have bet on Jimbo being able to find a combination of different things to be able to make it work somewhere down the line. That's not the timetable that a lot of people wanted. They wanted to be winning within 3 or 4 years, or at least, not be dropping down to 5 and 7 or losing 3 games in a year. I understand that. But the thing with A&M now, to try to wrap up here since we're at 27 minutes, A&M needs to find a new coach. And coaching, it seems like hiring coaches is like the lottery. Everyone thinks that their golden age is just a hire away, and it is, but you don't know. The odds are not in your favor exactly. Everyone hopes that they end up with a Nick Saban or a Kirby Smart, but they end up getting a Chad Morris or a Kevin Sumlin, and that's not anything against those coaches. It's just that coaching talent is scarce. Just like players, really good players are very rare. Very good coaches are very rare. And so, this new coaching hire, and I don't think it's going to be a big hire. A&M just spent probably over $77 million in the long run to get rid of Jimbo Fisher. How much money are they going to be able to get together for this immediate coaching hire? I don't know. It's definitely going to be less. Is it going to be a home run hire? Is it going to be like Kirby Smart or Nick Saban or something crazy like that? No, it's not going to be. It's going to be a bit of an experimental hire. And especially when you're pulling up one of these G5 coaches, you don't really know. You're hoping, you're hoping that his skills translate. You're hoping that it's not going to end up like Billy Napier at Florida, who had double-digit wins at UL Monroe, but his tenure at Florida has been not the greatest. Just because they win in a lower conference doesn't mean that they're going to win in a higher conference. So A&M's new coach, may not even have a track record of being able to compete in the SEC. He may not be able to compete in the SEC. With Jimbo, you kind of have to take what you know. And there's things that about Jimbo that it's like, depending on who you are, you would say, I don't like that about Jimbo. But what I do know and I like about Jimbo is that he's going to play teams close no matter who they are. He might get beat by, 3 touchdowns every now and then. But if you look at the records consistently, you know, 1 or 2 possessions, usually 1 possession losses. And that's where that's how you want to lose if you have to lose. Right? You don't want to lose, but if you have to lose, you want to at least make it a competition and not just a blowout loss. So Jimbo was close, and me personally, I would have taken a longer road with him. I would have given him more time. I would have probably pressured him to say, you know, what can we do about this quarterback situation? Because we can't get anywhere if we're not playing with our top quarterback. You know, if we can't, if we can't play with our top QB, then we have to go to the transfer portal, do something. So I would have put a lot of pressure on him to fix the O-line issues. If it's coaching, then find new coaches. And if it's just bad luck, then maybe we need a bigger quarterback roster. You know, more depth at quarterback. Try to get more skill in at QB. And this will be probably one of the last things I'll mention, but Jimbo Fisher and the whole play calling issue, like the whole offense, Jimbo Fisher's offense. I don't totally understand that because, I mean, if we look at the narrative was that Jimbo Fisher was just terrible at calling plays. Which, I mean, I don't understand because if we go down to 2018, you know, Jimbo's calling plays in 2018. Points per game, 36. It's 19th in the nation. Does that sound like someone who needs to give up play calling? I don't know. I mean, he does, you know, hang 74 points on LSU. I mean, it was in overtime, so the fields were short, but still, you know, that's still a lot of touchdowns that he called, and some crucial plays as well that he called. 2019, you kind of dropped down to about halfway, you know, 62nd out of 130. Not the greatest. And in 2020, they go up to 37th in points per game. 2021, they go to 56th. Really good year for defense, though. Third. That's pretty ridiculous. 2022, obviously, really bad. 101st. And 2023, still in about the top 20. And that was with Petrino, but I don't know if it was a lack of, you know, offensive knowledge or because he didn't want to get with the times, whatever that means. Because he was calling plays at Florida State too, and you know, he won ACC titles and national championship, and that was just a few years ago. So you know, it just seems like that accusation doesn't really hold any water. At least not from a lack of knowledge, maybe from a responsibility standpoint. You know, if he has to work on the offense and, you know, design plays and call the plays, you know, he has to be really involved on the offensive side of the ball. Maybe that responsibility, even though he seemed to be able to do it at Florida State, maybe A&M is a different animal. And I do think that each program is a different environment. And coaches and players are not always plug and play. So something about maybe the A&M environment required that he let go and delegate that responsibility. And this was just the first year that he's done it. So, you know, if Jimbo Fisher ends up coaching again, is he going to call plays at the next place he goes to? Or is he going to just let the offensive coordinator handle it? Or maybe, you know, give the offensive coordinator a structure and let him work in a structure that Jimbo designs? I don't know. So I guess the very last thing I'll say is that Jimbo Fisher, I forget how old he is. He's probably like in his late 50s. And this is just his second head coaching job, if you can imagine that. So there were probably things that he was probably figuring out as well, that maybe he couldn't do things at A&M the way he did exactly at Florida State. There was probably some of that, and when you're getting paid $77 million, you know, people aren't going to want you to be figuring that stuff out. And then, you know, they want you to have it figured out, so that's understandable. But I do think that, I mean, maybe A&M has a winning lottery ticket. It's always possible. It's just the odds are not in your favor. And so I would prefer to go with what I know. And what I know is that Jimbo can play close games. And I would have bet on Jimbo being able to figure it out. Maybe not in the time frame that we wanted, you know, year 5 or 6. But if I had the choice of getting rid of Jimbo and then kind of just going through coaches for the next several years, or sticking with Jimbo for several more years, and then maybe he figures something out, and then maybe you go to the SEC title game, maybe you win it, or maybe you have consecutive double-digit win seasons. I don't know. But that just seems more feasible to me because of the way Jimbo's teams would play. They would lose really close games against really good teams. You know, I think that is something that you want to have as sort of a baseline. You want to build on top of that. You don't want to not know that you can do that and then try to figure it out later, you know. So I would have taken the long road with Jimbo, which obviously hasn't happened. And A&M decided to go a different way and use a lot of money while doing it. But you know, A&M is not a stranger to spending a lot of money, at least in the past 10 or so years. But I mean, I think that's kind of the way I view things. I'm probably in the minority. There were a lot of people that were probably ready to move on from Jimbo. But I wasn't, and I just hope that A&M, you know, has a winning ticket. Because if they don't, things could get a lot worse. So, anyway, that being said, I think that's gonna do it for me. I will be seeing you guys in the next one.